ahead and do your introduction, and then I'll turn it over to you and Tammy to go through the presentation, and then we can talk about, kind of after the fact, doing a little networking if people are interested in that.
Sounds good.
Okay, everyone. Well, let's go ahead and get started here. And thanks for joining this great session. I'm really excited about this upcoming presentation by Craig Fischer. And we're going to go ahead and have Craig present, and Tammy's going to work with him on the presentation. And then afterward, we're going to go ahead and do a Q&A session with all the group here. And feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat, and then we can call on you individually. And then after we wrap up with Craig's presentation, if we want to do a little bit of networking after the fact and ask Craig some follow-on questions, that'd be great as well. So I want to go ahead and introduce Craig, and he is the Innovation Program Manager from the Financial Innovation and Transformation Group at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. And that's with the United States Department of Treasury. And so today, Craig will be presenting a demo of his work at FIT around his proof of concept for being able to pay both prime contractors and subcontractors in this National Science Foundation proof of concept that he set up. So he's going to run through that today. And I want to give you a little more information about Craig. He's an experienced program manager with a demonstrated history of working in government administration, and he's skilled at really bringing innovation to the federal government with emerging technology, carrying out these kind of pilots that we're going to see today, and helping the federal government really to navigate the future. And I think this particular POC is going to show is really going to, show the level of innovation that's going on at the Treasury Department and in the federal government, and how they can really leverage blockchain to enhance efficiency. Previously, he was with Deloitte for a number of years. He's also served on the CFO Council for the Executive Office of the President. And then he's also been on the Committee for Oversight and Government Reform as well. So Craig has a wealth of experience here, and I'm really looking forward to getting all of this great update on the proof of concept. So at this point, Craig, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you go through the presentation, then let's have a Q&A session. Thanks.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for inviting us to be here today. And I did want to mention I'm here with Tammy Johnson as well. Tammy's been sort of a partner of mine for the last few years on sort of exploring some of the things with blockchain technology and other sort of innovative efforts. So she's going to be along with me as well here today. But I did want to just a little bit more about the team before we get into this, give you some context about kind of how we're approaching innovation, how we're approaching blockchain. And Tam and I work for, as John had mentioned, a small team called the Office of Financial Innovation and Transformation. It is within the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. We're about a 16-person team, so not very big, but we do a lot of big things, I'd say. So we're, exploring artificial intelligence, blockchain. We do a lot with federal financial management standards, but I think really the domain in which we are sort of looking at innovation really has to do with federal financial management. Largely the way that I like to define federal financial management is sort of the movement of money, payments, collections. And you can see here from this slide, really what the Bureau of the Fiscal Service does, which again is a Bureau of the Department of Treasury, really kind of serves as the nation's bank when it comes to federal financial management. So we disperse payments, we make collections, we do a lot of the accounting from a shared services perspective for a lot of other agencies. We sell the securities to fund the government. So again, kind of serve as that nation's bank. So as we look to innovate, as we're looking for new ways to improve the way that we carry out financial management, that's sort of the things, the sort of the areas, the domains in which we are looking. So along with that, though, is I say one of the core things that the Fiscal Service does is payments. And Tammy, you can go to the next slide. just to give you some sort of a background on kind of our kind of reach into the payments is, back in 2019, we probably have some better statistics, but 1.2 billion payments totaling 3.7 trillion. Of that, one of the things that we actually are trying to do is to get rid of the paper. So moving away from paper checks. So we have about a 96% electronically dispersed payment rate right now, which is good. Of all these payments, the Bureau of the Fiscal Service does make about 87% of all those payments. There are a couple other agencies that have disbursement authority, but we do most of the payments on behalf of other federal agencies. And you can see that there's some examples there. And then most recently with COVID and some of those economic impact payments, we made all of those payments in 2020, 163 million payments worth $273 billion. So as you can see, payments is sort of core to what we do. And we're always looking for ways to improve. There's a lot of activity in the payment space right now. So we're trying to understand what are some of those technologies, those things that we can do to improve the way that we make those payments, facilitate those payments, which is kind of how we got into blockchain in the first place. So Tam, if you just want to go to the next slide. I wanted to give you just kind of a little bit of a background in kind of our blockchain journey and kind of how we got to where we are today. So, back in 2017, we kind of acknowledged, I guess, sort of found this blockchain technology and kind of what it was doing within some of the financial services arena. We saw that it was making some inroads at some of the other banks, and some other folks were looking at it. So given that we are an innovation shop, we wanted to better understand this technology, better understand what some of the use cases were. But we're basically starting from nothing though. And I think, we're a bit of a skunk works type team where we will get our hands dirty to understand something. So that was really the approach that we took when it came to blockchain technology back in 2017. And it took us a while to really find this, the use case that we're exploring right now, which I'm going to go into in a lot more detail a little bit later on. But just to kind of understand that we did not come out of the gate where we knew precisely and exactly what we were going to do. This was a bit of some learning that we had to do. So the very first thing that we did is we really just wanted to understand some of the fundamentals of blockchain. And we started off looking at a use case around asset management. Was our very first thing that we looked at, where we explored using blockchain technology to better manage and track the physical assets. When you start at the government agencies, the Bureau of the Fiscal Service is no different. You get a cell phone and you get some other equipment that has to be tracked. And we spend a lot of time doing that. So what we wanted to understand is, could blockchain technology be used to better track and manage that? So we actually carried out a small proof of concept where we use blockchain to track and manage cell phones. So, and this taught us a lot about just the fundamentals of the technology from a technical perspective, but also what might make a little bit better use case. We were able to see the sort of real-time transparency of sort of asset transfers, understand the peer-to-peer nature of blockchain, understand the resiliency aspect of blockchain. So this really just gave us that sort of foundational understanding of what it even meant to kind of explore blockchain. From there, we did a small little proof of concept where we tried to use the same logic to manage and track software licenses. I think that the federal government spends about $8 billion worth of software licenses every year. And, I think has been some reports out there from GAOs and others that are somewhat critical of the way that we are managing our software. We buy them and then sometimes we don't upkeep them. And we just have a pretty sometimes challenging way of managing software. So we thought maybe this was yet another way that we could use blockchain to give us that real-time transparency. If a piece of software wasn't being used, could it be reused? That was sort of the proof of concept. And really what we learned here is where, conceptually speaking, that it was a really good idea, but there was some last mile problems when it came to using blockchain here. There was still a lot of manual processes, and really kind of taught us that blockchain is probably best when you have sort of an end-to-end digital use case. And in the case of software licenses, we really didn't. But again, that kind of helped our learning and really got us to the use case that we're exploring now. And I think the one use case where we want to continue sort of exploring, because we are seeing some value in what we're doing. And that really has to do with using blockchain technology to facilitate grant payments. And really the way that this came about was the National Science Foundation, NSF, had reached out to us, being aware of what we were doing in the area of blockchain, and kind of came to us with a problem. And they said, our grant recipients, these prime recipients and these sub-recipients who receive federal grant funding, really are burdened by a lot of this reporting that they have to sort of have to go through in order just to receive some of this federal funding coming from National Science Foundation. Is there anything we can maybe potentially explore to see if blockchain could actually offer any value? So really our use case that we're looking for and sort of looking at right now is looking to use blockchain to really reduce that reporting burden that we are replacing. And if you just want to, Tammy, go to the next slide here. Takes a little bit for it to come up. There's a lot of images here, but I think nearly almost half of the time that researchers are really spending, it's on performing administrative tasks, and a lot of that is reporting due to the fact that we can't see the funding. We can't see the funding going, especially when there's a sub-recipient in the mix. So in many cases, the federal government will, and we'll get to this in the next slide. But, and actually, why don't you just go there now, Tammy, just so we can get kind of into the. So really a lot of this, at least some of this burden is related to the fact that we can't see where funding is going to subrecipients. Just to kind of walk through the current state, the future state on this slide. Today, when a prime recipient is awarded some sort of grant funding, they come to one of, I think there's like 5 major grant payment platforms hosted in the federal government. They'll come to one of those several payment platforms and they will draw down funds that will transfer the money from the federal government into the prime recipient's bank account. But in the case of subrecipients, when that prime recipient transfers money down to a subrecipient to carry out some of the terms of the grant, whether they have to buy microscopes to do things, teach children, whatever that grant is, we don't see that transaction. We don't see that money being passed from the prime recipient to the subrecipient. That's being done through the banking network, that's being done through the ACH network. So we don't see that. But because we don't see that, we ask for the prime and the subrecipients to give us a lot of information to help us better understand where that funding went to. So, and this is sort of like the burden that the prime and the subrecipients were really talking about when it came to the level of reporting that they have to do. So in our future state, what we would like to do, and what we're thinking about doing from our proof of concept and moving this into a pilot and eventually maybe someday into production, not there yet, we have a lot more things we have to learn, but is going to this, just going to move my picture of myself over here so I can see the screen. But is going to this situation where we now can see those subrecipients using blockchain technology. And we enhance that transparency, and probably many of you will probably already know this, through the idea of tokenization. So Tam, if you just want to go to that next slide. So if we, in our proof of concept, the idea here is that if we are able to tokenize these grant awards, and on the left-hand side of the screen here, you see from the National Science Foundation, this is a real grant letter that they use to disperse funding to some of the grantees. There is, effectively what we're doing when we tokenize this grant letter is we are taking key informations off of the grant letter, so the grant award, some of the key dates, some of the fundings that go along with those different categories, tokenizing all that information and putting that into a blockchain token. And it's that blockchain token that is transferring from the federal government to a prime recipient and then down to a subrecipient, as opposed to just making those funding transfers using the ACH network. So when we use the blockchain token, we're seeing where that token came from, who it's going to, what it's for, all of these sort of these key data elements that are baked into that token. And I think, to me, I think, my big takeaway from this effort was that, the real novel thing that we're doing, and one of the things we don't do today, is really combining that grant information with that payment information. Today, that information is riding on two separate rails. With blockchain, what we're finding is that we can combine those, that key information that really alleviates the reporting. Because again, as you all probably know this, when that blockchain token is moving and it goes from the federal government to the prime to the sub, we can see that. We can see that in near real time, in a real near time way. With that, we don't have to ask for a lot of the reporting that we do today. At least that's the sort of the theory that we're sort of working on. And we do have we want to show you a couple of things later in the demo, just to kind of show you kind of what we did to really alleviate some of that reporting using this proof of concept. But again, so this is just high level. This is kind of how we actually are, alleviating some of that reporting. We're putting all that information up front in the blockchain token. And as it moves, we can see in near real time the disposition of that blockchain token. So Tam, if you just want to go to the next slide. So we're going to show you, or at least Tam is going to walk you through a short demo of the application. And by the way, I don't know, Tam, we can probably put something in the chat, but we do have a link that you all can go and check it out for yourself. You want to play around with the application just to kind of show what we did. We did something called, let's call it, and we'll get to there in a second, but we did something called a clickable prototype, where we effectively recreated the application in kind of a self-guided tour. This kind of walks you through. So it's not actually tied to the blockchain application, but it does kind of give you a feel for how this all works. And this is effectively the flow in which it kind of walks you through, where we take that grant recipient, we convert it into, we tokenize it and convert it into a digital asset. Internal controls is very important from the federal government, establishing thresholds and key dates and things like that. So there's a step where you can incorporate a lot of those internal controls into the token. And then the application will show you how when they request a drawdown. And this is really the fundamental change in what we do today. Today, when they request that drawdown, they receive funds through the ACH network into their bank account. Under this scenario, under this application, when they request a drawdown, they will be receiving a blockchain token. And then you can do one or two things with that token. You could either redeem that token for cash, or you can transfer that token to another party who's actually still carrying out the terms of that grant. So, and all of this again leads to hopefully a lot of reduced reporting burden from the grant recipient and sub-recipient's perspective. But this is effectively the application that we built, and we're going to show you in just a second. And let's just go to one more slide, Tam, and then we'll get to the actual demonstration. So this is effectively just the screen, and this is here is the, and I think we can probably drop this into the chat, but down below is the URL, and you do need that little password where it's fit_GPS. Okay, it looks like you have to get off of we can do that in a second, but effectively this is what we want to walk you through. A couple things. Thank you, Laura. I see you just did that. A couple things here, just to point out on the left-hand side, within kind of that screen, it kind of gives you where you are within this process, because it can get a little confusing because there are a lot of different participants in this blockchain network. So thank you, Tammy. Yep, right there is where it kind of walks you through as you kind of take the self-guided tour. You can kind of know where you are, whether you're creating that token or whether you're setting the internal controls. And then really just what we found here is that, we'll get to this a little bit more at the end of the presentation, is just really what we found, a lot more transactional transparency than what we have before. That additional transparency does really lead to less reporting. We now know who those recipients are. It does improve that customer experience. And it's a much more efficient oversight because of those internal controls that we can now bake into those blockchain tokens. But I'm going to just stop there, and I'm going to pass this over to Tammy, who's going to show you just a couple things about how we are writing these things to the blockchain, how it looks within the application, but then really showing you this reduced reporting and how we've actually converted that real time, all that information, that blockchain information into reduced reporting. So Tammy, I'll just pass it over to you.
Tammy, I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to do what you need.
Thank you. So as Craig said, I'm going to walk you through the clickable prototype, and I want to point out a few features. So clickable prototype will show you three different types of personas. So we have the grant officer that would work at the awarding agency, and we have the prime recipient, which would represent the grantee review. And then we have the agency viewer, which is more like that oversight role. On each of the screens, you will see like a little bubble, and that really explains what is happening. So that's how you get that self-guided view, is to see what functions are being simulated. So I'm going to click in as the grant officer. Anytime someone does a transaction within the blockchain itself or the application itself, you'll have a password. So we know exactly who did it and when they did it. So there'll be sign-in credentials. I will mention, as Craig mentioned earlier, we have the process flow. So you'll see here that this is highlighted. So you'll see where we are in that process flow that we're demonstrating. We'll click in here. And as the grant officer, I have the ability to see the grants that I have. I have the ability to create new grants. You'll see functionality up here. And when we go to other views, the functionality will be slightly different based on their roles and responsibilities. I'm going to go ahead and create a grant. And I'm going to simulate this information. We have worked with many stakeholders to listen and hear what their needs are. So we had a prototype, we've had lots of meetings, we've built a clickable prototype to get feedback so that we could really understand what are those needs. Does this really address those pain points? Does it create other pain points? And by listening, we're able to, make some changes to this. So this is simulating actually inputting the grant by an individual grant. But we also recognize that we will build an upload feature from the award systems so that if, say, 20 grants are being awarded in a day, they can be uploaded. That will reduce problems with key punch errors. It will also streamline that process. So we're listening all the time to what's working well, what's not. So I'm going to simulate this by clicking in here, and you'll see that it just populates basic information from that grant award. So Craig showed how we were tokenizing that. And then in essence, this is what is shown on the screen. You'll see these dollar amounts here, and those are the parameters that were in the grant letter. And you'll see those numbers as we go through, and I'll point those out several times to you so you can see how things correlate. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. And anytime an action is created and gets posted to the blockchain, you will get this confirmation so you know that it has posted to the blockchain. So as I mentioned, we created that grant. So it was for $220,411. I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to show you just a few things on the screen. So if you look here, these are the amounts that were shown on the last screen. And there's several functions that we can do here. But we awarded this grant for $220,411. Now, in that original grant, we also allowed for subgrants to be issued, and that's where we said we didn't have the transparency. But by using this blockchain, we do get that transparency. So we have the $30,000 for the grant, the sub-grant to be able to be issued. So I'm going to log out here, and I'm going to go in as the prime recipient because I want to show you a few transactions from the prime recipient perspective, and then we'll go back to the grant making agency perspective. So again, I'm going to sign in with my credentials again, so we know exactly who did what transaction. And we've moved to the second bullet, and I won't stop every time and say how we're moving, but you'll see as we move through the demo, you'll see that we're moving down through that process flow. So I'm going to sign in. And as I mentioned before, we have a few more things here, a few more functions. So the send and request for tokens and also the wallet. Right now, I'm going to go in and I'm going to select the grant feature. And you'll see I have 2 grants that are available to this particular college. And I'm going to click into the one we created. Now, if you'll notice on this screen, I have some additional features also on the screen in blue. These are functions that are available to the grant making agencies. We mentioned internal controls. The government also has internal controls, but there are times when a grantee may want to make some internal controls. They may want to have a maximum reimbursement amount. So if a researcher wants to come in and request $100,000, they might say, no, we don't want them to request that much up front. They can only do 50,000, whatever that control is. Or if there's certain reports or approvals that are required, we can add those internal controls. We can do that both on the government side as well as the grantee side. So I'm going to go ahead and select $20,000. So anything that's over $20,000 is not going to process without additional approvals. So I'm going to confirm those, and it posts to the blockchain. And so those internal controls will take effect as soon as it's posted on the blockchain for anything going forward. If we've already processed transactions on the particular grant, those internal controls would not be in place for that. So now I'm going to go down here and I'm going to update the grant options. So again, as we were listening to our stakeholders, they said there are times when they want to go straight to redeeming funds. So they would have a request for funds and they would want to go ahead and do an auto redemption. So I'm going to click this on, and what this will do is do that request and redemption all in one transaction. So I'm going to confirm that option. And again, it's posted to the blockchain. So for this particular grant going forward, every time I request the transfer of tokens, it's automatically going to do a redemption as well. So I mentioned this new function up here that's not available to the grant making agencies, and this is to send and request tokens. So we also heard from the stakeholders that there were times that they may want to do multiple transactions at once. So they wanted to be able to select all or to be able to select multiple grants. So in this case, I'm going to select all. And you'll see these dollar amounts here. And those are dollar amounts that were that were on the award. And it's always going to say whatever amount is remaining. So we haven't done any transactions. So those are the same amounts we saw on the original award. So I'm going to simulate putting information in here. But again, if there were a large grantee who had many grants, they would be able to upload this information into the application. So we've done this, and you'll see that the remaining balances are so that we can't overspend. So it's another internal control, and we always know what's still available. So we're going to submit that. And again, we've got the confirmation it's on the blockchain. So we'll go to the wallet, and you'll see we had the one transaction. So we need to actually redeem it or return the tokens because this was not on auto redeem. So I'm going to click on that. And I have two options as the grantee. I can either redeem funds or I can return funds. And again, that was another function that has been a pain point, was actually returning funds and it getting credited to the appropriate grant. So we built that feature in here so that we can make those transactions, make that reconciliation to show the exact funds for this particular grant. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and redeem the funds. And again, that posts. So I'm going to log out and I'm going to go back to the grant officer, because a prime recipient sometimes will need to have approval from a grant officer. So again, I'm going to sign in, and I have a notification feature up here, and it shows the two transactions. So I need to go in here and look at this transaction, which is, they want to request 11,000 tokens, and I can either approve or reject the request. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and approve it. And I have my confirmation that it's posted on the blockchain. And then I can always look at my completed requests. So that was the one that I just approved. And I'm going to log out. And I'm going to go back in as the prime recipient. So at this point, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to sign in, and I'm going to go back to the grant that we've been working on so that you can see some more functionality. So as we mentioned, one of our pain points, apologize, I didn't mean to click on that quite so quick. One of our pain points is being able to see the funding for the subgrants. So we need to create the grant so that those parameters are created in the blockchain application. So that's what we're going to do here now, is we're going to create that particular grant. And so it's the same, it's a sub grant for the grant we already created. And these are the parameters, certain salary, travel, and so forth. And then it will work, the functionality will work very similar to what I've shown you for the prime grants. The only difference would be, because that relationship is with a prime and a sub grantee, there'll have to be an approval process from the prime grantee that the payment is appropriate. So that would be the biggest difference between the functionality of those two roles. So again, I'm going to get confirmation that it is on the blockchain. And then I'm going to go down here and show you history. So we've gone through a lot of transactions, and you'll see everything is recorded on the blockchain, everything that we've done, the drawdowns, the redemptions, creating the subgrant, the transfer of tokens. And then you'll see their statuses here, which will tell you whether it's completed, whether it's still a request, whether it's been approved or rejected, so that you can look at this and see exactly what's happened to a particular grant. And I'm going to drill down so you can see the information that we would have, the timestamp, the hash information, the amounts, etc., so that we have that complete transaction history of what's occurring. So I'm going to go back to my grant list. And we talked a little bit about the reporting burden. And so I'm going to click in here, and there's the Federal Financial Report for grants. And it's a common report. And by having everything on the blockchain related to the financial aspect of this particular grant, we can actually create this federal financial report, which saves an inordinate amount of time for the grantees. And then there'll be other reporting that we'll be able to do, because we have that full end-to-end transparency. So we can look at things like USA spending and the subrecipient reports that are required by the federal government. So all of that will be more streamlined using this. And I'm going to click out of that, and I'm going to log out. And rather than spend additional time doing the agency viewer, it is very similar to the views that I've already shown you, looking at the reports, the transaction history, and so forth. That's what would be in that view. So I won't spend more time talking about that, so that we have more time to spend talking about what we've learned and what our next steps are. I'll pause there and see if there were any questions about the demo before I close out of it.
Yeah, and Laura, are you going to take some of the questions there and provide them to Craig and Tammy that's in the chat?
I can, or if you have specific ones you think were relevant to that portion, if you can call them out.
Yeah, the first one, maybe Bogdan. Do you want to unmute Bogdan and let him ask the questions there? Got two questions really around regulatory framework and infrastructure.
Yep, Bogdan, I just asked you to unmute and you can ask your question.
Oh, hello everyone. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your presentation today. I just have actually three questions because your product seems to be pretty interesting. I'm as well in more or less the same business with a lot of experience into developing this type of applications, and not even. I'm actually today here with my partner Frank Petruca, who's Washington DC. I'm based Romania, and we are building a pretty complex innovation center that is focused on blockchain and some other technologies. And one of the questions to just jump in will be if there is any regulation, let's say legislation, especially in the US, using for this type of software based on the blockchain. Of course, if the let's say if the US federal entities accept this type of infrastructure. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so first on that, so we are running into a couple things. One, just on using the blockchain, you know, I think we built this using Ethereum. We did recently kind of go over to Hyperledger based SU. But one of the issues with using Ethereum that we found is that it uses a hashing algorithm that's not NIST, doesn't meet a FIPS standard for NIST. So it uses a Ketchik 256, which is not one of the approved hashing algorithms. So from like sort of a regulatory, I think nothing that we came across at this point from a regulatory using the blockchain infrastructure, the blockchain, it's more of the components of the blockchain, how it's hashing some of the information is really one of the hiccups that were identified. And we are working with the National Institute of Science and Technology, I think I got that acronym right, NIST, to actually sort of delve into that a bit more, just to see what some of the options are. Then we'll get into this into a second, but one of the other regulatory things that we did find through our work is that in order for, as you can kind of see from the application, the bottom line here is that what the way we get that additional transparency is that we use the blockchain to sort of help us pass that information between participants. But in order for us to get that additional transparency, the federal government is going to have to pay those subrecipients. That's how we know who they are. Currently, in the realm of grants, that there is no authority that the federal government has to allow the federal government to pay those subs. It has to be done from the primes to the subs. So that's one of the things that we're exploring, is this to better understand that regulation, is to see, does that preclude us, or is that a necessary reg? So more work there, but that doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the technology per se. So that's that question, and we'll get more to the statutory stuff in a bit. Tammy, did I miss anything on that one?
So the only other thing I was going to say is we are transferring tokens on the blockchain, but when it is redeemed for funds, we are actually redeeming out to our normal ACH payment process to actually pay in dollars. So we're not paying in tokens or any cryptocurrency. This will connect to the financial system and will kick off a payment process in dollars. So I don't think we covered that, and I just want to make sure that everyone was clear on that. We're transferring tokens to show the value for reporting purposes and so forth, but not actually paying in crypto.
Very good point. Yeah.
Okay, next question, it looks like, was around the underlying technology you're using for this? And there's also a question around if you considered using IPFS.
So, I mean, again, the app that you're seeing right now is built. I think it's going to show that it's in Vision was the app that we used to create this. We are using, you know, like I said, we built this on Ethereum. Recently went over to Hyperledger Besu. We are in AWS cloud environment right now. For the hosting the nodes, we are using proof of authority for the consensus algorithm. And then there's a lot of other things, MongoDB, there's a lot of other sort of like components in here that I don't have in my memory. And then in terms of alternatives, I think, and I am just kind of saying just a couple things from the chat. First and foremost, we are not, there was a couple of mentions about Cardano and some other sort of platforms. We are not, we are platform agnostic. I think we are just trying to understand the advantages and disadvantages of using blockchain technology. Again, I think you have to look at this from Tammy's and mine vantage point. We are an innovation shop, so we are sort of exploring and asking these questions around, is blockchain a better solution than what we do currently? So there is I think a question in the chat about why not just use a relational database? Great question. I think that's that's where I think Tammy and I are trying to add more value to this. This is again, proof of concept. This is something that we have not decided that this is definitely something that we're going to do, but we're still exploring whether or not this makes sense. And then give our recommendations to that. So platform agnostic, and still, you know, we're still in this sort of understanding if this is something that is better than the next best alternative. And we have not come to any sort of conclusions at this point, except that we do know that it offers a lot more transparency over our current way of doing things. Was there any other? So why don't we just real quickly, let's just go, Tammy, instead of let's just go to the next steps, because I think this might actually get to the very last slide, and we can kind of get to some questions, because I do see we're getting a little bit running sort of close on time anyway. This might start to help folks get a sense of kind of where we're going and put a little bit more of this in context. So while I'm letting Tammy find those slides, I just wanted to kind of mention, you know, one of the things that we are sort of learning from a sort of a prototype, working with a lot of end users, is that while blockchain is very, you know, we want to understand if the actual technology is adding any potentially value, we are having to incorporate a lot of the things that our grant recipients want. So there's a lot of non-blockchain things as well that we're having to incorporate into this prototype to really scratch the itch, to really helping them improve the way that they actually report and the way that they actually carry out their business. So this real quickly, then I will turn it over to a full-blown Q&A, but I did want to kind of give you a sense of like where we're going next with this recent proof of concept. So we are still in the proof of concept phase. We haven't even, the way that we think about this is the proof of concept, then a pilot, and then production. So we are still sort of in that proof of concept. We are seeing, and what we've learned in using our end users and using more of a human-centered design, is that there is value. We're seeing value in using blockchain to reduce some of that reporting burden. But getting to our step one here, we really need to understand the pros and cons, the alternatives analysis, looking at that return on investment, doing a much more deeper dive into a business case analysis, just to really help us understand if this is something that has the benefits over the cost, if this was something to be going into production. So that's a big point of this. And to someone's, you know, I often think about blockchain when I go buy something off of Amazon and I see the product that I want, it offers me like 3 or 4 other products that are just like it. We also want to do the same thing with this. Like maybe there is a couple other approaches to doing what we're doing to reduce the burden that could do it easier than what blockchain did. We want to explore that. We want to understand that. So, and that kind of addressed, I think, one of the questions about, well, why are you doing this? I think this is that first step is to understanding, like, is blockchain the best thing to do for this use case? 2, the technical understanding. So one of the things that I think this is actually another question for how we are hosting this right now. We don't have any sort of like philosophy on how a blockchain infrastructure would be hosted from a cross-agency application. So one of the things that we are doing is working with NIST to help us figure out, like, what would a cross-agency node infrastructure look like, and how would those ATOs, those authority to operate, how would that actually work? Because those are typically done from an agency by agency perspective, but now we have to be coordinated and sync up with other agencies to do that. So there's a lot more exploration on what a node infrastructure would look like. Is this something that we would buy? Is this something that we would build our own? So we do have a lot of questions around that. Digital wallets is another area where I think, especially considering that the Fiscal Service does payments, understanding just a bit more about digital wallets and some of the pros and cons, and just getting more knowledgeable about that is another area. Number 3 is sort of expanding our ecosystem. So I mentioned before how we've been largely working with the National Science Foundation and sort of their grant recipients and helping us to better understand that this is something that, again, scratches an itch from their perspective. We want to expand it out. You know, HHS does a lot of grants, Department of Education does a lot of grants. There's a lot of state and local grants that we give funding to. So we want to sort of get and capture their feedback as well, just to understand that this application adds value to them and to their customers. And then lastly is really just establishing connectivity with the blockchain application to an agency's financial system. So the analogy that I like to use is effectively, we've effectively, for lack of a better example, if you think about a casino, when you go to a casino, you trade money in for tokens, and then at the end of the night, you go and you cash those tokens out for cash again. Well, we've built everything except for that ability to cash those tokens and turn them into cash again. So one of the things that we want to do is explore the API connectivity that you would have to have back into an agency's financial system to make that happen. So that's part of the next round of work that we plan on doing. And hopefully, kind of what we're hoping for is that with positive findings, with positive sort of feedback from the community, is advancing this into an actual pilot where we can actually run some transactions through this just to get a better sense of the performance and just a better understanding that this is going to add value for our customers. So with that, I think there's a lot of questions coming in, and Laura, I'll just kind of lean on you if you wanted to walk through a couple of those.
Yeah, I'll have John, actually, if you want to call out whether you just want to read the question in chat, or let me know if you want me to unmute someone to have them ask live.
Yeah, I think Chris Gabriel has some good questions. So if you want to unmute Chris, that'd be great.
There you go. Take it away, Chris.
Hello, how's everybody? First of all, Craig, thanks for an awesome presentation, and Tammy and Laura and all the gang there at Global Blockchain Summit. My first question was around, and you briefly touched on it, Craig, about the tying in the payment rails for token redemption. I said, do you anticipate tying that back into the ACH/SWIFT? Maybe not SWIFT if you're only doing inside the US, but if some of the sub-grant people were outside the US, you might have to do that. So. So the idea today is, like, even when those drawdowns happen today in our current system, that information is all within the agency's financial system, and then the agency will send over a payment file to the Department of Treasury that says pay all of these entities, and then we will on their behalf. So the idea is that the blockchain kind of comes in between that process, where we will facilitate that information flow to have a much more transparent view of who's getting that funding. But when those redemptions occur, whether it be a prime or a sub, that information would flow back up to that agency that granted that funding. They would approve that, and then it would sort of like fall back into line with how we actually make those ACH payments. So yeah, we're really just using that blockchain to, again, this application is more about unlocking that transparency when there's a multi-tiered sort of like payment aspect to this. That's where that additional transparency is really helpful. But we do fall back into then traditional payment rails. Yeah, that's been the challenge to date so far. And actually, we found that to be pretty good on Hyperledger Fabric networks where you don't have crypto or mining. It ties back pretty nicely to that. But one quick follow-up question, and I'll give it back to the others. I was at the Houston Tech Rodeo virtually yesterday where the SBA did an actual seminar on grant applications for small business and tech startups and or any startup. And their part was the application process. So I'm curious as to why you guys didn't integrate, and maybe it was just too big for your POC, or if you plan on integrating the actual application process by standardizing the application API so that the first part of it is already taken care of, and then the grant reviewer, when they get in there, it's mostly done for them.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, I think we get a lot of questions like that. And my answer right now is that we went into this trying to understand the payment aspect of this. And if the payment aspect of this, just given the Bureau's mission, the payment aspect of this makes sense, then I think we can sort of like back it out into some of these other areas if it makes sense. But again, our philosophy is kind of like to start small, start simple. Let's not overcomplicate things. And then let's revisit that. But I do think there's a lot of different things that, if successful and if it makes sense, tying this into not only just the financial system, but the actual grant systems and potentially other like USA spending type things, just to give that real-time transparency you could argue that it makes sense to go down that path. We just didn't want to bite off more than we could chew within these sort of 6-month sort of chunks of work that we do.
Okay, perfect. I would like to go now to Jody. And Jody, if you want to go ahead and unmute your mic and ask Craig a question about NIST.
Thank you, Craig. That was a wonderful presentation, and Tammy as well for the walkthrough on the prototype. My question is NIST able to provide you guidance on the security standards for implementation of these DLT platforms? And also a follow-up on that is, are you getting any guidance on the security assessments of these implementations?
So I don't probably know as much about the second part of that question, but in terms of the first part, I feel our approach has been, NIST sort of lays out their different FIPS modules for how you have to and how you have to. So for the most part, we're just looking at, if we sort of unpack the technology itself, using Ethereum or using whatever we're using and sort of like apply it against those FIPS. Does it marry up well? The only thing right now that we found, and again, it's because we used Ethereum, is that it uses that catch at 256 as opposed to a SHA-2 or a SHA-3 hashing algorithm. It's been the only area right now. But I do think, given blockchain is more of a decentralized application where, again, it's not sort of, you're just not just hosting something necessarily within your agency, it's going to be cross-agency. I probably would need to sort of ask them if there's other standards, other things that we need to consider that we haven't considered to date when it comes to, I'm missing the right word, but the okay to actually, use blockchain in that space. But I don't know about the security. I'm not knowledgeable enough about the security stuff. I will say that we are working with them on this next project where we are looking to sort of understand that cross-agency authority to operate, just to understand, like, what does that even look like? How do we even do this as a government? So hopefully we'll unpack a lot more of the things with that effort.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
Okay, Craig, another question comes here from Jay Jamal about standards. And so Jay, if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask about NIST, that'd be great.
All right, sure. Thanks. So thanks, Greg and the team. This is impressive POC. I consult for government agencies. So a few questions. So you mentioned the Ethereum not in compliance, and you pointed out that FIPS too. Do you guys had any communication with Ethereum or NIST coordinate effort to debate that issue?
I don't think we've encountered anything yet with NIST on that. And again, we've just been kind of scratching some of the surface here. If you actually looked at, Tammy, if you have we sort of looked at 4 different components from NIST. The hashing algorithm was one. In the key management, there's another FIPS module related to that. There's 2 others that I'm missing. But again, the only thing that we sort of like having from a NIST sort of standards perspective right now is just the hashing algorithm.
Okay.
To date, anyway.
So do you guys participate on the NIST standard bodies, or you don't for the blockchain?
Yeah, he's asking a good question
Sorry.
there, Craig. So basically, what is your department doing as far as participating with NIST or even other ones like IEEE around, being a part of the group that creates the standards for blockchain and being an active participant there?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I missed that. So yeah, NIST has been a part of this entire project. I should have mentioned that earlier. So with us working with NSF, they've been pressure testing this application with us from the very start. And again, this is more of like a getting them aware of what we're doing, seeing things we're not going to be seeing from their perspective. So they've been along the entire time, and then will continue to be along with us. At this point, we're not really making any kind of recommendations to change any of the standards. We're just trying to understand what that gap actually is between the standards and what we're doing, what blockchain can actually achieve. So, but yeah, they're well aware of what we're doing and have been alongside the entire time.
Thanks, Craig. Glad to see you guys are ahead of other agencies. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, next I'm going to call on Stephanie Fisher. Would you go ahead and unmute Stephanie? And
hi, Craig. I just want to say what you're doing is extremely tremendous, and I was very excited to see this. In particular, I go back to, I was lobbying in DC during 2011, and it was at that time that a lot of the failure of a lot of the bailout and the stimulus packages of Obama's massive infrastructure and spending was becoming evident. And in particular, I remember a news agency that was going to be showing the results of all the spending. And they showed 2 tables full of binders of what was going to be massive infrastructure spendings and projects and job creation in America. And it was supposed to be a story of hope. And what ended up happening was after a week and a half, they had to stop because every piece of follow-up information they did was a bridge to nowhere, was a road that was not built, was a project where the money just simply disappeared and it didn't create the jobs. So this is where we're on this cusp.
My question is, Stephanie, just around, do you think that this would do an advantage to how the documentation and reporting burden can be reduced? I guess that's really.
I think what I'm seeing, what you guys have just built, this pilot you have built, is in your token. You have tied to internal controls to a date, and you have the total ability to tie your internal controls to releasing milestones and dispersing payments if in the case of an infrastructure deployment, releasing that when milestones are met to reduce the type of corruption and the lessons learned from the Obama era. And I see what you're building as something that could have huge, massive,
and
actually
the thing I'll say, Stephanie,
spending.
is let's just keep it very, straightforward here as to, what the proof of concept is. And let's, just look at the way that this can improve visibility and reporting. How about that? Can we do that?
I mean, and I guess that's where, if you can tie on an infrastructure deployment, tie this to milestone metrics. It just seems like that could be a way to learn lessons from what happened during the Obama era, loss of funds.
Okay, so I'm going to let Craig kind of just respond to that and just any thoughts around?
All I would say is that we've it sounds like some of what you're talking about is internal controls. We were able to specifically with some of these grants, bake in those internal controls, and then giving that agency that additional oversight capacity to before we make a payment. So I mean, that's all I'll say is that I think what we did find is that we did have more enhanced internal controls when it came to this application, which I think was a net positive. But
Okay, good. Next one I'm going to go to is going to be Brett Carpenter. Brett, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question about taxation here?
Hi, my name, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Brett.
My name is Brett Carpenter, and I'm being incubated by the County of Oakland in Michigan for a business taxation component. And my question is, have you given any consideration to the taxation models? Because I feel like that would move at least some forward thought for, for the long tail of what you're doing.
right now we're just, again, kind of keeping this really small, really simple, just focusing on this application. We haven't expanded it beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So yeah, that's about Brett, as much as I can probably offer you today.
And then my next question is, have you explored decentralized derivatives at all?
No, I mean, that's just not that that's a, I'm not taking a take on the question. It's just more of like that probably falls a little bit outside of what we do within the Bureau of the Fiscal Service from a financial management perspective. So we're right now, we're just going to just solely focus on the payment aspect of it and its impact on reporting.
And then my next question is, is the quantum department in DC, has it been shut down or something? And why are you not applying for funds with quantum? Because this is something purely that will be quantum in the future.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say to that. I don't, we get our funding sources through different means, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brett. So Craig, I want to circle back around with you on more of the reporting burden and on internal controls. So one of the great things that I saw about this proof of concept was it looks like right now grant recipients are spending 44% of their time on kind of the administrative burden of receiving grants. So kind of with looking at the optimization from your proof of concept, what do you see that burden going down to? You think it would be more of 24% of the time that they would be spending on that administrative reporting? Or what do you think the efficiencies could be gained from this proof of concept?
We don't have any precise numbers at this point. I think that's kind of one of the things that we want to look at in the next phase of this is to start to quantify what that burden reduction would actually look like. We have identified a couple of burdensome reports that we think that we could largely eliminate if we use blockchain to facilitate those payments. But at this point, we probably don't have a really good understanding of, and I think that's sort of just the nature of proofs of concept is you sort of do it and you sort of say, does this offer any value? You maybe sort of look at a couple of those reports that are causing some of the burden, but the breadth of which, I think it's still a little too early for us to tell. But we're hoping, as we sort of advance this, that we're going to have a little bit more information around that.
Okay, and then a follow-on question to that is, it looks like you've really been listening to your stakeholders here. And one of the things I caught when you were going through the presentation was the ability to return grant funds. And it sounded like that was really a big win for a lot of the stakeholders here. So maybe can you walk me through some of the challenges that you're facing today that really addresses and makes it much easier to almost kind of reconcile the books?
Tammy, you probably are better suited for this one than I am.
Yeah, so people can return grant funds through checks back to the agencies, or sometimes they're returned through Treasury. And sometimes they're not tagged with exactly what grant that they are returning the funds on. So then it's a challenge to figure out which grant it actually ties back to. And sometimes it takes extra steps because it doesn't go back like to the program office, it goes to the financial office and it starts there. So that tracking doesn't track back to the individual grant, and it takes a bit of time to figure out, which grant it belongs to, why it was returned. And so what we're doing with being able to track that on the within the application is it will actually tie back exactly to that grant. We'll know exactly why they're returning those funds. We could get it posted appropriately in the financial systems as well, so that all the books are in sync, so that the grantees, will know that, yes, we did receive it, it's tied back there. And then all the reporting that comes out of it will include any returned funding or, any adjustments that were made to the funding as far as like the obligations and so forth. We'll have that full transparency. And then everybody can come to the blockchain, or, is posting to the blockchain. And that's the central point of truth of what exactly happened to that particular grant. So that's, kind of the challenges, when funds are sent back in, that, they don't always have the right tracking numbers on them, or they, it could get separated from the right, tracking numbers. And by doing it on the blockchain, we'll have all of that transparency.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer, Tammy. Thanks for that greater insight into that. And so the other follow-on question I had for that is, right now you're doing the proof of concept with the NSF. What is the kind of the timeline and, additional agency participation look like going forward after you're through with kind of the initial phase of the POC?
Well, we do want to, capture the thoughts and feedback from some of the other grant-making agencies and those recipients as well. So we know like HHS is a big one. Somebody said USAID, they also give grants out. Department of Education, there are some that give them to state and local. So we do want to kind of capture, if you look at all of the use cases that where we pay grant recipients across the federal government, we would like to try to capture, 60, 70, 80% of that this next go around, just to get those stakeholders in, just to give us more of those insights into what would work, what wouldn't work. So, but I think, for example, right now, I think HHS is a big one for us. I think some of the state and local for us is good, would be good feedback and insights as well. But I think, Tammy, is there any that we all have targeted for this next round?
So we'll be working with the QSMO, and we actually are looking at HUD as well to expand based on some of the common grantees, that we have in common.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think, once you see kind of the feedback that you get from the National Science Foundation and work with, a few of these other agencies, I think really seeing what should be included in the solution and how that can really, increase the efficiency will come through loud and clear.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Tammy's going to have to drop. I can spend about another 5 minutes before I have to. So,
yep.
Happy to take more questions before I have to head off to another one.
Yeah, no problem, and that's good. And I think it's good to wrap up. If there's anybody else here that has a good question, Laura, do you see anyone that pops out at you?
I think we have everybody covered. You had a question from Kate and a question from Gordon. If you want to look at those to see if either one hasn't been answered.
Yeah, we talked about transparency. We talked some about US aid. So I think we're pretty good here. Craig, if you have anything, or Tammy, you want to convey to the group, let's do that. Otherwise, I think we can go ahead and wrap up here. It looks like maybe one more questions come in here.
Yeah, no, I just want to just thank everybody for sort of the insights and things like that we're getting. That we like to do presentations like this is to get some of the feedback. I mean, the important thing to know is that, you know, from our perspective, this clearly is still a proof of concept. It's still sort of clearly in the innovation exploration phase. We are seeing some places where it could add value, but we're also seeing some hurdles and some challenges as well. So we want to continue working through those things, and getting feedback and other thoughts are really important for us. So John and, you know, and Laura, thanks for, you know, giving us the venue here today to sort of share what we're doing, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this has been a wonderful presentation, and I think everyone got a lot out of it. The other question I think that Chris Gabriel just kind of asked about is, are you looking for any assistance on the R&D side, or where does that currently stand with the agency right now?
No, currently we're good. We're looking to do a next round of contract work. So we put that out there through our procurement shops to do that. But at this point, I think we're, you know, those are the avenues that we use to do that. So yeah, that's all I can really say about that. Otherwise, it gets into procurement sort of sensitive stuff. But we just go through our typical procurement process to get some of the help that we need around any sort of anything with any of the technical things that we have to do.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Craig, Tammy, I really appreciate your wonderful time this morning, and thanks for the great presentation. Looks like some innovative work going on there, and I look forward to, you know, a future presentation where you come back and we go through this again and just kind of say, you know, here's the wins from what we did with our POC, and it'll be a great